Hello, thanks for joining us today. My name is Seth Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance, and we are very happy to present this webcast, Maximizing Smart Stormwater Infrastructure for Public and Private Benefit. We've got a great lineup today. We've got close to a couple hundred people that have signed up for this. And without further ado, I just want to go through and introduce the speakers for today, and then we'll have a little bit more of an in-depth bio from each person when they present. The first speaker today will be Dominique Lueckenhoff. She's a Senior Vice President for Corporate Affairs and Sustainability. As you can see with the Hugo Neu Group, we'll have Sandyhertz with Maryland DOT. We'll have Toni McCrory with Walmart, Joe Diekfuss with P4 Infrastructure, Todd Weik with CBC Engineers, and we also have what's the name not listed here is Jacob Zimmerman with Wisconsin DNR as well. So just giving you a lineup about who's going to be speaking today, and we'll hear more from obviously each one of these folks. And the lineup here of topics, we're first going to talk about, we're going to hear from Dominique talking about kind of the concept of private assets for public good, and she'll spend some time kind of going over this topic, as well as the community-based public-private partnership program approach. Then we'll have a panel discussion. We'll have brief presentations from Sandy, as well as Toni, and then we'll have an ongoing longer discussion that Dominique will oversee and facilitate. And then we'll hear from Joe, and we'll hear from Todd, as well as Jacob, talking about applications for new types of sensor technology in the city of Cudahy, Wisconsin. And then we'll do Q&A and we'll do wrap up. So that's the outline for today. I did want to note before we get going a couple housekeeping things. First, want to thank the Chesapeake Bay Trust. They have made this possible through their funding, so that's very much appreciated. We have had a number of stormwater pond webcasts recently, and we're having another one next week. It's the third in the series, focusing on technologies in ponds. So it's going to be Wednesday, October 7th from the same time, 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. There's the link there if you want to register. It's going to be no charge as well, and we'll send the PDF of these slides, as well as everybody else's slides, so you can click on that link. If you have any questions, you can contact me, and my contact information will be provided as well. I did want to note that this webcast is being recorded. As I mentioned, there'll be a PDF of the slides available, and we'll also have a recording available within 24 hours, and that will be at a link that is going to be part of an email that'll come out within 24 hours as well. There's 2 PDHs available for this, and you can just let me know if you want a certificate that shows that as well. Sometimes they're automatically generated in a format that works for different states. Sometimes they're not. So if you need something different than what's automatically generated, just let me know. Attendees for today cannot speak. So if you have any comments, if you have any problems with technology, if you can't hear us or something like that, use the chat function, I believe, or the question function. I believe you guys have a chat function as well. But we're really looking forward to hearing your questions. So please use the question function, and I'll be kind of facilitating that, and I'll be dishing those off to the different speakers and the facilitators. So please send in those questions anytime. If you can, identify who the question should be going to, or if it's just a general question, then we can handle it that way too. So I think that's it. Before we get going, I did want to, it's always good to know who's on the, who's here. So I'm gonna launch a quick poll to ask what your professional background is. So if you can take a minute or two to do this. And in the meantime, I will discuss Dominique Lueckenhoff. Again, I mentioned that she'll be our first speaker. She is, as I mentioned, Senior Vice President for Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at the Hugo Neu Group. She has a long track record in local, state, as well as federal government, with most notably EPA Region 3 in the water division there. And Dominique, you can obviously provide your background. I will note that She is the chair of the CBP3 Center of Excellence, which is a Center of Excellence of the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance. This is something that's launched now. Well, we will have at the end of this year, we'll have a CBP3 training and certificate program. So be on the lookout for that. If you're here, you probably have an interest in that topic. So, and I am looking to see how many folks have voted. Oh, about 80% have voted so far. That's great. So I am going to close this, and we can see it looks like we've got a pretty good mix, actually, of different. Yeah, so it looks like we've got a pretty good mix of the different types of folks from the public sector. It looks like we have a lot of public sector, specifically stormwater program managers, and that's really what we're aiming for here with our audience. So thank you for sharing on that. And Dominique, if you're ready to go, I'm going to hand you the presentation controls.
Sure.
Okay. And if you're ready, go ahead and go forth, Tom.
All right, let's see. My screen's there, right? Let's see.
Nope, we don't see your screen as of yet. Oh, there it is.
Nope.
You
see
no,
it?
It looks great, Tom. Nope, go ahead.
Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can.
Interesting, because I can't. All right,
Yeah.
well, we'll deal with that. First of all, it's kind of great to be back in good company. As Seth mentioned, I was a career EPA employee, and some of what you'll hear today, I was very closely involved in. Now working on the private side, so it's interesting to have different perspectives on these kinds of things. And as you just heard, Seth indicated that I am continuing to support the launch of these types of approaches, which I think is needed more than ever, the innovation, how to rethink how we solve growing problems. So I want to say thanks to NIMSA and the Trust for hosting this webinar, and for everyone here that's joined us. I'm particularly excited too to hear about some of the incredible applications in Wisconsin. So we've got Maryland and Wisconsin. Certainly there's more of that going on, but I do want to make the case of private assets for public good. And so if you can hopefully see this, this next slide. Seth, for some reason, here we go. I want to start.
We can see it open.
Okay, great. I want to start with this slide. It's a beautiful picture of our nation's, this is contiguous obviously, but our nation's major water bodies, which also of course consist of rivers and streams, over 3.5 million miles of rivers and streams. So we're talking about water. And you know, there was a movie, A River Runs Through It. This was a great quote. Eventually all things merge into one and a river runs through it. And the point here is to realize how much we're talking about in terms of water resources, but importantly, the connectedness, the upstream, downstream. You see the largest basin. There are 7 major rivers in the US. Missouri is the longest river. Obviously the Missouri, Mississippi, you see that large pink area. I'm from South Louisiana, and you know what happens in the upper Midwest has impacted the Mississippi River and the Gulf, where I grew up. So we really do have a connectedness, and it's important that we not only realize this, but how we enable each other to take care of our precious resources. So now I want to move from the water bodies to U.S. land. And this is really the point of private assets for public good and what we're talking about in terms of stormwater. Because stormwater is all about what is happening on the land. It's non-point source runoff. So you see this map that shows the yellow area is a large pasture range, green forest and cropland, and that's over 1.9 billion acres. 60% of it is privately owned. This is who owns land in the US. So as I just indicated, about 60% privately owned. And then you see a much smaller percentage in terms of public. And if we think about how we manage stormwater, particularly from the standpoint of MPDS and MS4, there you see 3.6%. So the 3 to 9% really are entrusted with managing stormwater quality and runoff. And I want you to think about that in terms of that watershed basin map. How much can we actually expect to be accomplished? And now that's not to ignore that there are good stewardship activities. Certainly a lot of land is federal land. Interestingly enough, you know, federal government, federal land, except there was some focus on roads recently, don't hold MPDS MS4 permits. They are bound to general construction, but not an MS4 permit. So, you know, how does that very, very small percentage, the states that also are required to oversee implementation according to water quality standards, how do they protect the majority of waters? Well, the truth is, really can't. It just is this limiting to public right-of-way. We're just not going to get there. And in fact, we aren't getting there. This was one of the last 2017 report to Congress on the status of our nation's water quality. You can see once you look at 25% in fair condition, which means highly threatened, and 46% in poor condition, that's over 70%. Over 70% of the water resources are in trouble, and increasing threats every day. We were talking before the webcast, I mentioned hurricanes because I track them, given my family's down in South Louisiana. And of course, no surprise, we're already past the expected, it's an unprecedented rate of intense tropical depressions and hurricanes. In fact, over 24 tropical depressions, 23 major national storms, 8 major hurricanes, and they continue. In fact, October and November are projected to be significantly higher in terms of temperature than normal. And then, of course, the devastating effects of these wildfires out west. Just reading about it is heartbreaking. You know, as hundreds of thousands of acres now gone, lives gone, animals, habitat, you know, people, an entire town I just read Sunday in California had to evacuate. And with this is all the secondary and tertiary impacts of smoke and carcinogens, and of course, certainly water, whether it's a need for more water to address or contaminated water. And all of this in the age of COVID, which is actually now mutating. And of course, I know everyone's aware we're projected to have an increase in the flu season. So the challenges are endless, and I really wanted to really bring the picture of the significance of what we're talking about. That's as many of us are focused on all water resources and the balance of a sustainable community, sustainable economies. This is what many of you, I'm sure, know as stormwater practitioners, that studies were done many years ago, but now certainly proven true. What you see is that when there's at least 10% impervious, you know, development, for example, in a watershed, that watershed begins to degrade. And so you see from left to right and then down to the bottom, 5, 10, 20, 30% impervious, the significant erosion and sedimentation and deterioration of that watershed, and the importance of how that also impacts what I just indicated, which is increased storm intensity and local flooding. That is compounded by rising stormwater needs and an ever-expanding funding gap. You know, those of us who have been champions in the stormwater realm for many, many years, see it as the pivotal connector, whether you're talking about improving, reducing CSOs, supporting, source water, et cetera. That it really still has not been funded to the degree it needs to be nationally, state, local, and that's why we all have to help and figure this out. So these are just a summary of the impacts and the interrelationship in terms of runoff and other areas. And then of course the increasing list of pollutants from pathogens, and now we know COVID, algae has significant impacts across the country. PFAS, certainly seeing it not only in contaminated fields, but in groundwater, in surface water, nutrients and pesticides, heavy metals, manure, land applications, biosolids, air deposition, endocrine disruptors, pharmaceuticals, plastics. We're seeing more and more plastics. It becomes a bit overwhelming in terms of, how exactly are we really going to get somewhere in terms of turning back the impacts on our receiving streams and our water resources. Just to put in the context now, the regulatory context, 150 billion. I'm sure it's actually more than that in terms of stormwater wet weather needs. We've got 7,500 or so MS4s, phase 1s and 2s, 772 combined sewer systems in the US. Again, remember that backdrop and that original water basins map that I mentioned. Of course, we're all aware, as we're going to be talking about this webcast, about understanding how important it has been to make the transition from impervious to pervious, from traditional stormwater, which essentially slope development, flash floods, now everything's scouring the streams out, to captured, infiltrate or filtrate, capture, treat, store, reuse, and green infrastructure. And the wonderful thing is, having been there before people knew what green infrastructure was, and part of an effort with EPA to promote green infrastructure and start to see these incredible technologies that combined are getting greater efficiencies. And you'll be excited to hear more about that later. But we mentioned the community-based P3s, and again, I'm convinced as a career public servant, I was convinced then, and I ran local environmental programs, that if we only focus within public right-of-way, and even to the degree we could address some private land, which is very limited, we're not going to get anywhere. We need to look at public-private partnerships, but we also need to have them be very place-based. That is what gets the level of acceptance. That is the value proposition. Importantly, we need to figure out how to do more with less. We don't have, we've seen public monies are diminishing. Major needs for ratepayers, taxpayers have gone up. In fact, on the water treatment side, it's not even there, because many treatment facilities and utilities have not had the resources to constantly survey and determine how the needs really have gone up, but they don't match the rates. So this effort was not only about alternative financing and innovative partnerships, but how can we look at technologies and drive innovative green technologies? How can we create incentives through our regulatory approaches? That would also include credits and offsets. How do we expedite large-scale delivery performance capacity of green stormwater infrastructure because of all the additional benefits, including air quality and local jobs? And big on this is O&M, because local governments have not really been able to invest in O&M, certainly not even monitoring. So it's exciting to hear about these real-time technologies and these types of partnership approaches that help to address it. So I'm sorry about the text on this slide. I'm going to give you real quick. Community-based partnerships, when do you consider it? Certainly, if you're looking at wanting to expedite on scale and to get an economy of scale and to achieve 30 to 40% in savings while bringing other benefits to that community, which can say, all right, I'll invest in this, but I want to improve our local parks, or I'll invest in this, but I want to create local jobs training for the community. That's always a sell. I want to do this, but I want to combine it with brownfields, because brownfields also help to bring in economy and improved environmental conditions along with jobs. I want to do this, but I want to try out a new technology or maybe several new technologies, but I can't, as a public entity, take on the risk. Or I want to try some different pots of money and integrate them and move it quicker. That's when you bring in these types of partnerships. And in that corner, you can see from the existing CBP3s, and I'll continue to commend what's going on in Prince George's County. We're excited about Chester and Salinas and a number of other places, Milwaukee, others that are coming on board with their own place-based approach, which makes it exciting because it's new every time it takes on the form of that geographic location and the values to those communities and resources. But being able to integrate schools and knowledge-based training around this and build a future workforce. Here's the platform. This is pretty straightforward. The municipality, of course, could be a county. The private side could be a joint venture. It's a special purpose entity that comes in to help address the key performance targets that have been set up by that public partner. As well, very important that measurable performance is a part of this, and transparency as well. This can be done because many folks have thought, because it's called the CBP3, that relies on P3 legislation. No, actually a number of those out there are using procurement for that government entity. You don't have to have P3 legislation. You do have to be very clear up front on goals, performance goals. And you'll hear about the pilot in Maryland and the importance of setting the right parameters, realizing you're likely not going to get it perfect, but setting those parameters and creating an overall management scheme to get it done. So now on to utilizing performance-based partnerships for smart communities and smart stormwater. Just a little bit of an intro to the discussion today. We're now using this word smart. To me, smart is how you figured out how to do something better and more cost effective with greater results. However, as we hear about smart cities, and smart, I think most of us know, in the vernacular, it's come to mean somewhat the Internet of Things. So here's the Cambridge definition of smart infrastructure: result of combining physical infrastructure and digital, which provides improved information to enable better decision making, faster and cheaper. There was an effort that I led at EPA called Faster, Cheaper, Greener, and I had it faster, cheaper, greener, smarter. I think this is, this integration of the technology to improve upon performance and make it easier to deliver, but also with the metrics that come with it, those measurable improvements actually get more buy-in from investors. And by investors, I'm going to start with the community and the people that pay taxes and rates, investing in these infrastructure programs, these utilities. Gosh, it's always better when you can show me how my money actually produced an improvement for my quality of life and that of my community. So smart technologies for sustainable water infrastructure, in summary, enable greater measurable performance and results, enable stormwater credit generation for overall savings, where we can now enlist all that private land that still has everything to do with water, but create some incentives as long as it is very well defined and the performance can be measured and reported, and you're saving money at the same time. Can deliver greater results, benefits, and long-term value, creating positive assets and asset management. Real-time monitoring, which is a requirement of a permit for those of us that know stormwater permits over time. It was too expensive to actually do the right kind of monitoring, but what's exciting about these technologies coming on board is now having the ability to do that, and pretty much real-time compliance comes with that. Time is money, and overall, we've got efficiencies. So we're doing more with less. And through that, we can get greater support for these types of investments from public and private entities as we grow local and circular economies, as we grow these technologies that help with resiliency, create more jobs. So green infrastructure stormwater credits, just a summary. You also hear that referred to as impervious area treated credits. I'm not going to get into too much detail in terms of reading the slide, but essentially, you've also heard of, this is in Philadelphia was the first to have this impervious area ordinance, so that parking lots, which previously contributed nothing in terms of a local stormwater program, now, but having an impact, obviously, on runoff, are now a part of addressing the problem and incentivized to reduce that imperviousness so that they pay a lower fee. And then at the same time, there's the benefit to receiving waters. That's sort of the general gist of this. But now, if we go beyond that, and we have, I'll use a mall that can actually, it's not permitted, it's meeting any local requirement, but still has some opportunity to increase the address of stormwater. How do you incentivize that? You do it through the creation of a stormwater credit that's clearly defined, and that's a bit of what we're talking about as this type of approach. So now I just want to show the CBDP3 platform, but utilizing this approach of private assets for generating sustainable green infrastructure stormwater credits. So we've still got the municipality, but it could be that, so you always have a buyer-seller, right? It's buyer-seller, it's a market. The municipality may be the purchaser. You'll hear about DOT. Any permit holder would be the purchaser. The special purpose entity could be the seller, but it could also be a joint venture that comes in and says, we will help to create and manage 2,000 credits. We'll take on the risk for you, public entity, because we know there are limitations in terms of access to private property and other kinds of capacity issues. But what is also very important, if you look to the left, key stakeholders, the regulatory community. In this case, the example you hear was EPA and as well as the state of Maryland MDE. You'll hear from Wisconsin. The regulatory community generates is responsible for meeting requirements, sets the guidelines. So they set the rules of the game. And then the third-party certifier, who is independent, but certainly approved by the regulators, comes in to ensure that that facility, that operation generating the credit meets all requirements for compliance. In this case, you know, it's a beyond compliance because it can't affect the baseline of where it is. You'll hear more about that later. And then, of course, mandatory monitoring requirements to ensure that it's meeting the goals of the program. On the right, you see asset holders. So, you know, private landowners have to agree that they want to participate in this. They don't have to. So there needs to be a bit of incentive for private landowners. You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this. The conservation universe, you know, for habitat protection and preservation got the private side a long time ago. Wetlands restoration and preservation, the wetlands arena got it a long time ago, setting up wetlands mitigation banks. Brownfields got it a long time ago, where EPA basically went to the private sector, said, we'll give you flexibilities, will you please help us? We cannot clean up all of these sites, but you can come in private sector and not only clean it up and improve the quality of life for the communities, but you can also create more value for local economies. So look at these models. These are all public-private models. It's about time the stormwater sector got it. So is this a high-performance partnership? What do you think? And who are you in that picture? Please reflect upon yourself. Thank you very much. But don't get too carried away with it. However, I will say the dog reminds me of my Rottweiler, Georgie, who was, you know, she probably would do something like that and have a rat on her back. So demonstration, lessons learned. Now we're getting to the action. I do want to just indicate that right now, Hugo Neu, the company with whom I work and who has very much supported our CEO, Wendy Neu, incredible on the environmental side and the whole resiliency, sustainability side. We're actually creating a 130-acre national model of resiliency. A former Navy shipyard turned out destroyers, 4 destroyers in an hour for World War II. Over 35,000 people worked there. We had a hospital. We had, you know, a focus on performance, but also very important to the local community as an anchor institution since 1917. We're not going anywhere. So we have rebuilt this site, which was 5 feet underwater after Sandy, to be this next generation green development where we are addressing next generation green infrastructure. We're a model featured in New Jersey Futures Developers Guide on green infrastructure to meet also to meet the requirements and go beyond that. At New Jersey DEP has set for stormwater to basically demonstrate MEP on GI before going to gray address of stormwater. So you see some of the areas that we're focused on. We're also doing a mix of renewable energy and promoting emerging technologies that support energy, water, food resilience. We just completed design on a green street. This is definitely private assets for public good because we don't own the street, but we're featuring elements that we think could create a model for other communities as streets are for people too, and featuring a lot of green infrastructure. This sort of leads to the next discussion, what we call high performance partnerships. This one focused on ponds. You know, I'm now going to tell the Wisconsin guys they have a high performance pavement partnership, and I think, you know, we hope to see this sort of smart BMPs and smart green infrastructure examples across the country. And I know there's a lot of effort going on, including by current community-based P3s that have Clean Water Partnership accessing private land for some time, and now understanding continually how do you do it smarter and better, where it's easier for all the key entities to participate. So it's my pleasure actually to say that you know, this was one of the last projects that I worked on before leaving EPA, and I want to commend EPA and MDE and Maryland DOT, pivotal partners who agreed this was a necessary thing. Walmart, who was willing to put up its assets, because we were looking for, you know, universal application if we were going to pilot it. How could we do it where we could transfer it more universally? So DOT has facilities all over the state, so does a Walmart. So I want to thank everyone, and I'm so pleased that it got off the ground. As with any new thing, you start to look at lessons learned and how you would do it better. But the point is that champions stepped up to make this happen. Despite the fact that there could be many naysayers, a lot of perceived risk, I really appreciate those who take the first step, because we will continue to increase that curve and that learning curve and do it better. So thank you very much. That's it.
All right, Dom. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We've got a couple of questions coming in, Dom, if you want to grab them. But before doing that, I wanted to, I'll take the screen back here so we can see who's going to be talking next. But before going on to that, Dom, I just wanted to, I guess, again, reiterate. Well, first of all, it's a great overview of everything, and it's just a tiny little bit of it's the tip of the iceberg, right, of all the information and all the work that has been done that you led while you were at EPA, and things have grown since that time. So thank you for sharing that. And again, this is the kind of information that NAMSA will have in the CBP3 Center of Excellence that Dominique will be chairing, and I'll be working with her as the director for that. Through the grant from Chesapeake Bay Trust, we will be providing technical assistance to communities and other types of products over the next 3 to 6 months. So be on the lookout for that. Dom, a quick question. And then we'll transition to the panel discussion.
It might be a quick question, but not a long answer. So, I mean, not a quick answer. So you sure you want me to?
It's up to you. You can defer if you want to. It's a long question, actually, but we'll see. So maybe it's a long question, then it'll be a short answer.
Maybe Tony can answer for me, or Sandy. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry, Seth.
Okay, so the question is, how do the projects relate to stormwater management that is required for development and redevelopment? Do the public-private partnership elements need to be above and beyond requirements?
That's not a quick answer. That's, first of all, it depends on what the need is. And public-private partnerships could address anything. It could address, the CBP3s were to figure out how to expedite, one of the counties had 15,000 acres they needed to get done. They needed to meet the Bay TMDL. So that was about how do we round all this up and get it done quickly, but also where we generate some benefits that our communities care about, like, for example, local jobs and working with schools, et cetera. Now, of course, if you want to go beyond, it's basically setting those key performance targets of what you want to achieve. Do you want to manage 500 ponds or facilities? This special purpose entity can create that extra capacity for you. You can set the goal and say, look, I got to manage 500 of these that I can't do now, but I have to achieve it with, cost effectively, and I'd like to save money. And throw it out there to private sector. I used to think, and as a public entity, we always think, because we've grown so much, we got to figure everything out. Even when we don't have the capacity, whatever comes, we're supposed to just be able to solve it and figure it out. We don't have to. We can put it out there. We could say, this is what I want, and this is what I want, this is what I want. Can you deliver it? And then put good minds to work, and drive the demand for more cost-effective platforms, whether it's finance or technology or design, integration with that community. So that's kind of the answer. And then I've already forgotten, and maybe everybody else has too. That was a third question.
That's all right. That was we'll get to that. There's and we have a lot of time for Q&A that you will be facilitating, Dominique, after the next two speakers go through. So this could be a good transition here. So the next two speakers will be Sandyhertz with she's the Assistant Director of the Office of Environment with Maryland DOT, Department of Transportation. I shouldn't use acronyms all the time, and Toni McCrory, who is the Director of Compliance for Walmart. And if you guys want to talk about any more of your background that provides some additional context, that'd be fine. But Sandy and Toni are going to each provide a brief overview of their involvement with a high performance partnership, which is what Dominique just talked about at the end of her presentation. And then we'll have a lot of time for Q&A. So keep those questions coming in. And I know that Dom, I'm sure you've got questions that you've got in mind too. So with that in mind, Sandy, I'm gonna share my make you the presenter, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. There we go. Looks good.
All right. So thank you, Seth, and thank you for having me today. As he mentioned, my name is Sandyhertz. I'm with the Maryland Department of Transportation. I have been working in the water quality field pretty much my entire career, primarily in non-point source pollution. Started looking at ag, and then when I went over to DOT, it was more stormwater focused. So that's just a little bit more about me. I've also known Dominique for a very long time, and I always hate following her on presentations, so this should be interesting for me. So just to kind of get into the High Performance Pond Partnership, which is what that HP3 stands for on the screen that hopefully you're seeing now. We have been I would say a long time co-conspirator / collaborator with EPA Region 3, primarily when Dominique was there, and have worked on several different projects with them in the past. Most notably for me, and one of my favorite projects is the Watershed Resources Registry, which every once in a while we still try to bring Dominique back into. So about 2 years ago, I guess a year and a half ago, Dominique reached out to us at DOT, and she had an idea about looking to do a community-based partnership, private-public partnership, and wanted us to be among those that she talked to start this effort. And I remember very well that it was a very snowy March 7th, I think it was, 2018, that, and I see Toni nodding too, because I think she and her colleague, Rich Daly, flew in from Arkansas that day. Literally the entire city of Philadelphia was shut down. And we committed to driving up. I get a little disoriented with North and South sometimes. From Maryland to meet with them, and they literally were the only people in that building that EPA is at in Philadelphia. So they let us in, we had our meeting, and it was just a preliminary discussion between interested parties to talk about the potential. What is the potential for Department of Transportation to partner with a private entity And what were our needs? I think it was more of a for those that are familiar with the RFP, request for proposal type process, it was almost like we were having an in-person request for information, an RFI, where we were sharing, the technology that that Opti had created, which is one of the partners in the joint venture that we're in, or that they're in, and then the assets that Walmart had available and the needs that DOT had. So just by way of background, a large majority of the Department of Transportation assets within Maryland were built prior to stormwater regulations. As everybody knows, you're required to manage stormwater runoff from your assets. So Dominique mentioned in her presentation that in the Chesapeake Bay, there's a Chesapeake Bay TMDL. MDOT actually has permits for all of the business units except for the Secretary's office, which is where I work. So feel a little bit of relief there. But we're basically required to not only treat the stormwater runoff from our new or redeveloped assets, we also have to go back and retrofit for the assets that were built prior to stormwater regulations. And therein really lied the rub for us at DOT. I'm not sure how it is in Wisconsin, but in Maryland, when we purchase right-of-way for transportation infrastructure, we try to limit the amount of right-of-way we need to acquire. We consider the footprint for the asset that we're creating or building, as well as the needs for stormwater management. We also factor in how our transportation infrastructure may impact the existing land use and communities. So if we're disconnecting a landowner, do we need to acquire that parcel in its entirety so that they're not cut off from access to their property, those sorts of things. So there's a lot that goes into it, but the main goal for us is to minimize our need to have a tremendous amount of right-of-way. I think that the private sector appreciates that, and certainly within the public sector, it also reduces our operations and maintenance requirements. But it also posed a challenge for us when we received our NPDS, which is the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, MS4, which stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System permit. We have 6 of those, well, essentially one phase 1, and we have 5 TBUs that are in a phase 2 MS4. So we had a lot of impervious acre that we needed to treat that we already owned, and we had really no right-of-way to put new pond infrastructure or best management practices in place within our right-of-way. So we were looking at the several potentials. What can we do with our existing asset inventory? And then how, so we sort of took the low-hanging fruit approach. And then beyond that, what are our options? So the conversation back in March of 2018 was really very timely for us. We still had a couple years left on our first phase 1 permit, which was through our State Highway Administration. At the time of our meeting, our average just construction costs for our best management practices were $150,000 per impervious acre treated, which is extremely high. And it was not a sustainable figure for us when you consider that we had close to 5,000 impervious acres to treat just in the first permit we received alone. So the group that got together presented us with an opportunity to test innovation from a technology standpoint with a smart pond retrofit, and then also the potential for innovation from a contracting or a procurement delivery mechanism. So that's really where we started from. So it all started a little less than 2 years ago on a snowy day in Philadelphia. So, what makes the pond smart? And I was going to put a little Homer Simpson gif on here and have SMRT come up for those that watch The Simpsons, but I decided I would use this diagram instead. And I'm going to just focus on really the big picture. So the exciting part about the smart pond technology is that you're taking an existing asset, whether that be a dry pond or a wet pond, and as long as that pond is up to current code for dam safety requirements and other engineering factors, and by the way, full disclosure, I'm a biologist, so any engineering technical questions, I am definitely going to punt to somebody else. But the main system, the way it's set up is they actually retrofit the existing passive outflow from that pond with an actuated valve, which is connected to a level sensor. And that level sensor is also connected to a technology that is then connected to the cloud for forecast data. So essentially what happens is, if you can take a look at the diagram here, the level sensor is constantly communicating with the Opti cloud-based platform to tell the folks that are monitoring it, what's the level of the pond. When we have forecast data that comes in and is predicting a storm, the benefit of the smart pond technology is that you can actually open that valve to do a pre-release of water in that pond to expand your storage capacity ahead of a storm event coming through. So you're doing more of a slow release as opposed to having it reach capacity and go into your your emergency spillway and then potentially have erosive flows downstream. For us, we were interested in it also from the standpoint that closing that valve and holding water back in the pond for a longer period of time allows the nutrients and the sediments to settle out, and it allows for a longer retention time in the pond for infiltration, so water quality improvements. And it actually was an approved best management practice through the Chesapeake Bay programs. I forget what the name of the group is. I think it's probably the water quality goal implementation team, but they approved this as a best management practice for Chesapeake Bay. So that is a smart pond. I know Tony's going to talk a little bit more about it, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. So really, I think one of the biggest things that I wanted to share today was really the procurement aspect. So anybody who's ever worked in Maryland, no offense to those from Maryland that might be on the call, but our procurement is not easy at a state level. We have a lot of rules. When you talk to other states, they're like, oh, well, you just go out and we say we need this, and then we get the contract and everything's rosy. That's not the same way that it works in Maryland. So when we approached this innovative partnership, we really needed to have a understanding of what our contracting options would be at DOT and what our known limitations were. So at the beginning, when we started talking about testing this out, this community public-private partnership, we kept referring to it as a P3. Now that itself would not raise anybody's hackles probably in most places, but within Maryland, P3 for Department of Transportation has a very specific connotation, and there is actually a codified section of our state finance and procurement statute that really spells out this extremely arduous, mind-numbing process for doing a transportation P3. So we had to pivot away from referring to it as a P3. Then we had another hiccup hit us, which was right at the time we were discussing it, there was really only one game in town that we were aware of that had this continuous monitoring adaptive control technology. And that presented its own hiccup in that it was now considered a sole source procurement, which we try very, very hard not to do, particularly in transportation. So we like to ensure a competitive process. So now we can't do it as a P3 because it would add way too much to the timeline for us to get to the endpoint, which was June 30th of 2020 for us from a permit standpoint. And we didn't want to pursue a sole source because it was requiring a lot more, again, hoops to jump through and justifications for this. So serendipity happened. It just kind of came into play. And in our times working through developing the contract language and how we would go forward with delivering on the project, a couple of other entities came forward with similar technologies, continuous monitoring, adaptive control technologies. So we were back in business with a competitive procurement. We still had the time crunch issue though. And that's where our partner, Maryland Environmental Service, came into play for us. Maryland Environmental Service is another, I know they don't like to be called quasi-state agency. They are a state agency within Maryland. They're just a little bit different from other state agencies in that they're not in the same pension system and retirement system. And they have the ability to provide services directly to other state agencies. I had an MOU with MES, and what we decided we would need to do is have them work as our intermediary. They had a stronger procurement team. They were able to work through a procurement contract process faster than we could have done it at DOT. So what we ended up doing was issuing Maryland Environmental Service a task under our existing MOU, and we said to them, here's what we want you to do. We want you to put together a request for proposal for a contract. We would like you to set that contract up so that it achieves a generation of 100 impervious acre treated credits. At the time, we just wanted to have a target for people to hit. We had some base parameters in there, things like our desire was to have it be only one private sector partner so that there wouldn't be a lot of moving parts. We also wanted it to be done by a certain endpoint, and that was June 30th of this year. And then ultimately what MES would do would be to serve as, for those that are familiar with like the banking industry, they were serving sort of like our broker and go between whoever won the RFP and MDOT. So we pay MES to draft the contract. We pay them to do the vetting of the contract and the awarding of the individual contract with the joint venture. And then ultimately what I do is I write a check to MES to purchase the credits as a commodity. And that's really how it came out for us through the process at MDOT. This is another slide that I know that Tony's going to be speaking to. So I'm only going to speak to the side that I touched on it already a little bit. I'm mostly going to speak to the right side of this graphic up at the top, which is how it works. Again, MDOT has an MOU with MES. MES put together the RFP for what ultimately the joint venture of the Nature Conservancy and Opti ended up winning. And they developed the credit purchase agreement contract with them. Under my task with MES, they invoice me monthly for the work that they're doing to coordinate with the joint venture. And then ultimately, they also act as the certifiers for the credits that are generated once upon retrofit is done. Once they're certified, they will get an invoice from the joint venture. That joint venture will say, okay, we produced, just looking at my slides here, if they produced all of these treatment credits, it ends up being something close to $2.46 million. They get invoiced for that $2.46 million, and then they in turn send me an invoice and say, hey, in addition to the labor hours I had this month, oh, by the way, you owe us $2.46 million for the credits that we purchased for you. One thing that is, I think, critically important to mention and a huge benefit to this type of agreement and arrangement is that our costs that were $150,000 per impervious acre treated just for construction went from that to $37,500 per impervious acre treated. But the kicker and the best part is that the long-term operations and maintenance of that facility and the technology being used is for a period of 20 years. And those credits are also certified for that entire 20-year period. If for some reason the credits run out of, are no longer certifiable for whatever reason, something happens, the way that the contract was written between MES and the joint venture is that there's a prorated way that they can either pay back the money that they've already received up front, or they can find another suitable pond to retrofit and replace the credits that way for whatever that period of performance remaining would be. So there were some lessons learned, and I'm not gonna, we're still kind of in the mix of getting things done. So far, of the 3 ponds that were pursued, Aberdeen is fully constructed, and I believe right now they're just waiting for final as-built approval and some sign-offs from Maryland Department of the Environment. Both Fruitland and Hagerstown, which were the 2 other sites, are still either in design phase or pre-construction phase, but hopefully will be underway soon. I think one of the things that I really wanted to stress for those that are on the call that might be considering this is the true need to do your due diligence. And I don't mean just due diligence from the standpoint of knowing who your partners are. That's kind of a captain obvious thing that we should all do when we enter into a contract. But, have a real understanding of some of the potential limitations you might have from a regulatory standpoint. So one of the things I think that might have been challenging for us in this partnership, and I'll certainly let Toni speak to what she's found to be a little bit challenging from the Walmart side, is that you really need to have somebody that has a really firm grasp on local stormwater management requirements, really be aware of, vetting the infrastructure that you're going to propose before you go to the regulatory agency so that there's not any unforeseen additional work that needs to be done that you're not prepared for. Because really, once you fix that contract price on the per acre treatment credit, you can't really go back and say, oh, wait a minute, it's costing us a little bit more to do the retrofit than we intended. It's set at that point. So due diligence on the part of not just the contractor that's going to do the work, but the private sector entity that is then potentially finding out that it's a little bit more than they expected. So the other thing that we found for this particular project is that it was really important to collaborate closely with MDE. And I think that we did a pretty good job of pulling MDE in, asking for their expertise, letting them know that we understand this is a new, technology that we're pursuing, but that, we hope that they will be flexible and work with us on that. And we have seen that. They've been fantastic. So bottom line for me is that I think that the P3s have the potential to help curb the growth of urban stormwater runoff as a major source of pollution in the U.S. In Maryland alone, I think it's something like 92% of our land is privately held. So really, going back to a point that I think Dominique made on one of her slides, there's really no significant way we can have an effective strategy for water quality improvements related to non-point source and urban pollution if we don't start to bring in the private sector to help with that. It's going to take everybody working together to really realize the type of improvement we're looking for. And that's it from me. So I guess I'll hold questions until after Toni goes.
Yes, Sandy. Yeah, exactly. I was just going to transfer right over to Toni just to kind of keep the ball rolling and then we'll have some time for Q&A after that. So Toni, if you're ready, thank you, Sandy. That was great. And that was a lot of great information. Thank you for doing that. Toni, are you ready to take the reins? Okay.
I am ready.
Okay, excellent. Okay.
All right. So get this going really quick.
And Toni, could you give a little, again, brief background so that folks know who you are and where you're coming from?
Yeah. And I think I just showed the wrong thing, so let me X out of that really quick. Okay, yeah, so my name is Toni McCrory. I am with Walmart. I actually work in our environmental health and safety compliance team. Been with the company for about 12 years now and have had the pleasure of working with our water compliance team, as well as our sustainability and our environmental management system. So a little bit on the tech side too. So that's been amazing experience that I've had. And today I'm really here to share what it looks like coming from the private side, why we got involved, why you're hearing from Walmart in this presentation, and then also to, as Sandy shared, really go through what we learned and what we hope to improve on as we hopefully get engaged in more of these projects, because we've learned a lot through this experience, and at the same time, we know we have a lot more to develop and grow and contribute. So first off, why we're here, as everybody shared, non-point source pollution. It is the biggest risk that we see out there as far as our waterways go. And when you look at Walmart and the overall size and scale of our footprint nationally, we have over 5,500 locations across the US. And every single one of those locations has a stormwater system. Not all have ponds, however, we're conveying water off of a big chunk of impervious land. So we've all got systems out there. And, our stormwater system, or our stormwater program as a company, we started in the early 2000s. We knew we had these systems out there. We knew we needed to maintain them, or we were going to definitely get those notices of non-compliance from the entities that were out there, coming out and inspecting us as programs were being set up across the country. And so we really started early 2000, first off getting an inventory of what's out there, what are we responsible for, and then matching up that inventory with, what's the actual regulation that we're trying to meet? What is this community that we're operating in asking of us with these systems? And so when we matched up that information, early on we discovered we can't do this in-house. We're going to have to go out and get some vendor partners. And so we took the time, vetted some national providers in stormwater maintenance, and got a good footprint out there, taking care of these systems, keeping them within compliance, doing the maintenance elements, but also doing the repairs on these assets early on in the process. And so as we went from, just knowing what we have, maintaining it the way we were supposed to, later 2000s, we started to discover, we need to have the systems and the technology to support this. And we knew that we could be doing more. We didn't want to go from, having these systems, they just lay out there and not putting their full use in for the communities in which we serve.
Toni, this is Seth. I just want to clarify, if you could go to presentation mode, we could see everything a little bit bigger. Not a big deal.
So, sorry about that. Does that help? All right. So with these assets that we've got out there, we're really looking at how we can enhance them, how they could do more to support the communities. And we started, having conversations with a number of different organizations that had the magic bullet of how are we going to put these systems to work, and had a really great conversation with technology called Opti back in about 2016 timeframe. And so through that conversation, we actually decided on our own, we need to have a partnership or a pilot project set up to where we're going to pilot this technology. We're going to see what it can do for us, because I'm maintaining over 5,000 stormwater systems out there. I'm getting feedback and information from my vendors that are out maintaining these systems, spending millions of dollars a year, that how do I verify what they're doing? How do I do those checks beyond getting that, you know, thumbs up or thumbs down from the regulatory inspection that took place at this site? And so with our Opti pilot that we put out there, we really found that we could start to see these systems in real time, which was great. But then there was also the price tag piece of, okay, does it really make sense to enhance every single system we have out there? Well, when you've got shareholders out there, you know, how are we going to balance those competing shareholder responsibilities? And so when we were approached to come up to the Northeast in March of 2018, we were so excited to be a part of this because we knew that this is really that next phase of where we're going with managing our systems. And we could get to a point where having more of these partnerships out there, we could offset some of that maintenance expense that we're incurring and will continue to incur, and additionally gain the insight into how our systems are performing and are we sending those vendors out to maintain in the best manner and the timeliest manner. But most importantly, and this is where it really came down to a sales pitch within our company as we're, you know, explaining to all of the various legal teams and tax teams and real estate teams that we had to work with internally, it really came down to this is a win for the communities that we operate in. You know, we can take the Opti technology and you know, really start to show improvement in the water quality. And so this slide is just a snapshot of what do those longer detention times, what do those translate to the customer actually seeing, our associates seeing when they're seeing these sites that are enhanced with this technology. And so this became really a win-win-win conversation as we were having it with our internal partners around the company. We take the asset that we already own, we already pay to maintain it, we're enhancing it with improved technology that gives us real-time visibility into its performance, which means I can just-in-time service it to meet the requirements, but then also I'm providing this benefit to the community where I've taken this asset that was doing its job, but could be doing it so much better. And so we just really embraced the thought that this doesn't need to stay in just the Maryland region. We really need to see these expand. But we also know that we're not going to be able to do it alone. It is definitely a full partnership. And so I want to take a moment, and I'm so glad that Sandy and I both had this slide in our presentations, because I can't appreciate what that partnership role really looks like. Because if Walmart had just come in and said, hey, we want to do something, you know, that's all great. Yay, Walmart, you're trying to do something, or whoever the big box or private entity is. But how do you actually get that off of the ground? And so this structure, although we know this structure is not going to be what it looks like everywhere, this structure really enabled us to take the Maryland project and get it off the ground. We could actually move and have the momentum that we needed to test out what works, what doesn't work, and start that feedback loop. I have to second what Dom said about having those ambassadors, having those cheerleaders for this project. My previous boss, Rich Daly, who was really instrumental in getting this off the ground and in pushing us towards this, he was a cheerleader. He was a proponent all the way around. And if we didn't have those cheerleaders within each of these partnership organizations, I can honestly say I don't think we would be where we are today with actual construction completed and moving forward towards construction on the two other sites. Those cheerleaders are just pivotal, because this isn't always a quick process. It may be quicker than some of the things in public, but really getting to know what it is you're trying to achieve, having that common goal, and then having those cheerleaders that are going to take the time, have the conversations, really sit down and work out those challenging bits of it, because we're going to run into challenges. We know that because we don't know everything. And so having those ambassadors, those cheerleaders that are supporting it, those are also the ones that are educating everybody around them. And so one of the things that I'd say, as far as, you know, what were some of the struggles that we saw from our side, it was the education component. And as Sandy said, you know, getting in and having those difficult conversations early, clarifying, okay, I heard you say this, did you mean this? And making sure that we were clear in what the expectations were, and being flexible in meeting the requirements. Because, you know, for a lot of things, when you approach a challenge, you're going to say, okay, well, it has to be done this way. Well, really, does it have to be done in that particular way, or is there another alternative that will still get us to the end goal? And so I'd say we've learned a lot of that element. Now, how do we get to the ultimate end goal? And we've got a lot of great minds working on this partnership, very smart people, very, very technical conversations at time, and then also the practical conversations of what does this mean for the community and the various parties that are engaged and involved. So I will say, you know, from the private side, I again can't overestimate the amount of time that it's going to take to really craft where you want to go with these, crafting what, where, and who you need to get engaged, finding that right technology that really fits for what you're trying to achieve, and then going all in, being there for those tough conversations, being able to pivot when you need to pivot on things, and don't be afraid to you know, brave your first nor'easter, get out in the snow and start to make those connections. So that's really what I wanted to focus on with my portion of the presentation, Seth. I'll let you take the screen back, but I think I'd just stop there and say, what questions do you guys have? Because I had so many questions starting out this process, and if I didn't know that, you know, I had people like Dom and Sandy to say, hey, what does this mean? I don't know that we would have gotten as far as we did as quickly as we did.
Yep, thanks, Toni. Yeah, and there are some questions that have come in, and Dom, you know, I'm sure you've got questions. Should we, for the sake of time, though, should we keep going, and then we can have all the questions at the end? Does that sound all right, Dom?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Sandy and Toni, it was great.
Absolutely.
I just have to say that, as you guys know how excited I was about all of this, it was really exciting to hear what's going on in Wisconsin. You know, to hear how the technology is being applied there, and again, the support of public official from the state of Wisconsin. What you guys just highlighted, the importance of champions and smart thinkers, and you know, across all the different important parties. So I want to make sure we give our new friends from projects in Wisconsin enough time here, because I think this is exciting, honestly. So if folks could just save their questions, because I'd love to just, you know, hear from Joe and Todd and company.
Yep, and those questions are coming in, and definitely keep sending them in. And then so next up is Joe Diekfuss, Todd Weik, and Jacob Zimmerman. Joe, can I hand you the presenter control
yes,
here?
Definitely. Yep.
Cool. All right. And again, if you guys want to provide a little bit of background for everybody, and before you get going, that'd be great.
Yes. Yep. One sec. Just got to bring up the. Okay. So
looks good.
All right. Great. Thanks, Seth. And you know, we're excited about this opportunity, and I'll give a little background about myself first, I'm actually a structural engineer, and a lot of my experience is designing buildings and bridges and civil site features across really the country in my former role as a consultant. So you might be wondering what I'm doing, in this conversation today, and it really stems from earlier work that I did as a graduate student and my experiences with sensors and sensor technology. And that's essentially why I'm here. A couple of years ago, we started or founded P4 Infrastructure, myself and two others, with the idea that we wanted to connect people with the built environment. And so I'll leave my intro there, and I'll just briefly introduce Todd. Todd is a civil engineer or engineering consultant with CBC Engineers, and Todd has more than 30 years of experience designing stormwater infrastructure for municipalities. And so he's a huge resource in this conversation. And hopefully at the end, we can also have some conversation with Jacob Zimmerman, who's also on the call. We've had a number of conversations with the Wisconsin DNR, and I think it'll be great to have Jacob's perspective and the DNR perspective as we, as we continue this conversation. So with that, I'll start with explaining who we are at P4. P4 stands for Products for Public-Private Partnerships, and our goal, again, is to connect people with the built environment. Our products are intended to drive down costs related to operations, maintenance, design, and construction of really all infrastructure, but today we'll focus on the stormwater aspects. We recognize at P4 that private investment in public infrastructure through a P3 model is definitely a great way to address the gap in dollars needed versus dollars available. And at P4, we understand that in order to make that a reality, our industry needs data to reduce risk and attract the private investors to the table. We've also noticed that stormwater infrastructure has been doing a really good job in the area of P3s, or public-private partnerships. And what we've noticed as we've looked at a lot of reports over the last couple of years is that the common tool for all stormwater infrastructure stakeholders is data, measured data, to be able to define things like performance, maintenance, and health. We've also had a number of conversations over the last couple of years with communities in our state of Wisconsin, and the questions that you see on this screen keep coming up. And so I'll just read through them quickly. How fast does my storage gallery discharge? Does my subgrade infiltration rate change over time? How much stormwater am I actually capturing? When should I perform maintenance? Which type of BMP do I build? How effective is my BMP in removing pollutants? How many BMPs do I need to build to meet EPA regulations? Can I increase the efficiency of my existing and newly built BMPs using technology? And finally, do I have excess pollutant removal credit to allow water quality trading? These are questions that keep coming up over and over and over. And it's really the only way you can start answering them is by collecting data and measuring how these things are working. So to answer the questions, we developed InfilTracker and FlowRTC. These are our IoT systems, and they include a rainfall measurement system, we call it RainMX, a water level or level measuring system, InfilTracker, and an optional smart valve system we call FlowRTC. All of the systems are battery powered, solar charged, and wirelessly connected to the cloud. They can be installed pretty easily with readily available equipment, typically housed within a DPW staff or typical rental equipment. The installation that you see on this screen was at Cudahy City Hall. It happened in January of this year, and the DPW actually did the installation themselves with minimal oversight by personnel from P4. And then the other thing that I'd note is that this system or these systems are applicable to all BMPs. We just happen to be showing permeable pavement today, but definitely applies to all BMPs. Here's a side-by-side scenario showing an infiltration type BMP with and without InfilTracker and FlowRTC systems. On the left side, water exits through underdrain or infiltration, with corresponding pollutant credits given. And the volume exiting through either of these is a function of the site conditions like subgrade seepage rate, size, number, and location of those underdrains. After the inflow tracker and flow RTC systems are in place, we can begin answering questions like, what happens if the amount of water assumed to be running off and funneled to the BMP is not what we expected during the design process? What is actually used for the rainfall? What are the runoff coefficients? How was the land use source area determined? What if you could determine for a given rain event the amount of water that actually makes it to the BMP? What if you could hold water in the BMP as long as you could to promote infiltration and increase residence time before letting the water exit through the underdrain and do it without any risk of the system not draining? This is the value of real-time monitoring and real-time controls on the outlets. Shifting gears for a second, this is how we basically this is a source load and management modeling system. This is how we can show how our data fits within existing methods. And so here in Wisconsin, we typically use WinSlam, but I know that there are a number of other states that use the same software, but there are other software packages out there. But essentially, any source load and management modeling software will have this sort of flavor. But because it's Wisconsin, we'll focus on WinSlam for right now. Once a user is in WinSlam, the user can provide a whole bunch of data and inputs, and you'll end up with a tree diagram like the one that's on this screen. Land use defines the pollutant source, and the source area defines the pollutant load after applying a whole bunch of parameter file information into the model, like a rain file, a pollutant distribution file, a runoff coefficient file. WinSlam computes the total pollutant load and total stormwater volume generated by each land use and aggregates those calcs at junctions like junction 1 shown on this screen. After this information's in the model, a baseline conditions or no controls analysis is performed to estimate the amount of pollutant load and stormwater volume reaching the outfall. After the no controls analysis, BMPs get added to the model. BMPs obviously either retain, filter, or infiltrate stormwater, which reduces the amount of pollutant making it to the outfall. Adding a BMP does not change the amount of stormwater volume making it to junction 1, but could and usually does change the volume at junction 2. Here's where we can augment the existing methods with the data that we're getting in from the field. What you're looking at here is an output summary for one of the sites that Todd will discuss in a little bit here, that Todd actually designed. It's a permeable pavement site. It's analyzed with a single underdrain at the bottom of the storage gallery, and the subgrade seepage rate used in the model was 0.04 inches per hour, or something that's equivalent to a clay type subgrade. The junction volumes are shown on the left in yellow and orange highlights, and the BMP performance is shown in terms of percent reduction from baseline values, is shown on the right in the red box. When the infiltration rate, essentially subgrade seepage rate, is much higher than assumed, let's say instead of 0.04 inches per hour, it's something closer to 2.5, which is actually what we're measuring out, very close to what we're measuring out in the field. You can see that it's pretty clear when you look at those percent reductions, how much more you're able to remove with the increased infiltration. So this is the behavior of the BMP with Flow RTC. You're able to promote infiltration and pollutant removal at the highest efficiency for as long as possible. If it doesn't drain within the drawdown period required, the system will autonomously drain itself by opening the valve. The volume of the water that's infiltrated and the volume of the water that's discharged are documented continuously, and we can correlate volume measured in the BMP to rainfall intensity and duration continuously and adjust the pollutant concentration and removal accordingly. This is how we maximize BMP efficiency and make sure that the communities that with these BMPs are getting the credit that they're due. Here is some data from, again, one of the sites that Todd will talk about. I'm highlighting 2 rain events in this case. The first occurred on July 9th of this year, where 2.39 inches of rain fell within a 24-hour period. water level under the pavement didn't rise above 7 inches for this first rain event, and that's because there was no flow RTC in place at that time, and water was allowed to exit through the under drain as quickly as it got there, essentially. So the slight backup of 7 inches was all that was measured, when in reality this permeable pavement gallery is 37 inches deep. On July 22nd, we installed flow RTC, which caps off the under drain with a valve, and the next, or I would say the first significant rain event after the installation of that valve, a similar rain event, it's 2.14 inches fell in 24 hours, and that spiked the water level under the pavement up to 32 inches. Now, what's important to take away from this slide is that before flow RTC, that water was, we measured how much went in, and an equivalent amount of water entered the system, but it was never retained in the gallery and forced essentially to go into the ground. It just was allowed to basically exit through the under drain into the storm sewer system, which means the pollutant removal efficiencies were at 65% and 35% for TSS and phosphorus respectively, whereas after flow RTC, the 32-inch water level was measured, but you can see it went back down, the valve was closed, so water was exiting through subgrade seepage rather than under drain discharge, and so as a result, that second rain event, or the first significant one after the valve installation, was 100% removal efficiency for both of those pollutants that were being tracked. So I guess what I would do at this point is I'm going to hand it over to Todd. Todd, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'm
so
ready.
I'll hand it over to Todd. So Todd, if you want to take it over and talk about some of the stuff you're doing in Cudahy with
Sure.
with some systems. Right.
So real briefly about me. I'm actually a professional landscape architect, which always seems to make engineers step back and gasp. But nonetheless, I've been practicing stormwater management and water resource engineering for well over 35 years, and have written copious amounts of municipal stormwater management plans that range from excuse me, a couple pages long to volumes. And so I've got a tremendous amount of experience in dealing with design issues and certainly with the concerns municipalities have in trying to achieve compliance with TMDLs and MS4 permits. And so the one thing that I've noticed, throughout my career is that, many communities across the nation are now faced with the idea of having to meet these compliance goals. And obviously they've all used similar kind of tools to get there. They've got an engineering plan. It's filled with watershed delineations, hydraulics, hydrology, water quality calculations, and BMP toolboxes that are applied to meet these compliance goals. The one element that they seem to miss, and I'll be honest with you, I probably have done this myself, is that we as the planners or the engineers tend to do a real lousy job of telling these communities, where does this stuff got to go? We identify the toolboxes, but we really, it's kind of like, well, here's 25 different things you can do in this watershed to get yourself into compliance, and yet we leave it up to the community to make the decision of what one to pick and where to go with it. And so really it's the blind leading the blind, sadly, and there's a lot of dart throwing in order to achieve what they think is going to get them to compliance. And sadly, in the case of Cudahy, there's two watersheds. There's one that drains to Lake Michigan, and then there's one that's a TMDL watershed that ultimately drains to the Milwaukee River. Well, the city, in their wisdom, has thrown darts. And sadly, most of the BMPs they put in are in the Lake Michigan watershed, and they're not taking advantage of putting BMPs in the TMDL watershed, which is where they've got to start focusing their infrastructure needs. So, like I say, Cudahy is really no different than any other communities in the nation. They're highly urbanized. They have to meet these compliance goals, and so at the end of the day, they're very concerned. They became very concerned about, how much money are they going to spend? Where do they put this stuff? How are their current BMPs working? And probably the most important question they kept asking me is, when do we know we've done enough and we've met compliance? And I think every community out there, anybody in a TMDL or an MS4 situation, has got to be asking yourself the same thing, because you may have a stormwater utility in place, you may have, however your taxations are set up, development fees, whatever it is, and those are all applied to meeting compliance. And so we have these massive budgets on an annual basis, and they're just going along saying, well, gee, we got to meet these compliance goals, but yet they really don't know in time or with real data, they may have already met it, yet they don't even know it. And I think that's what's really important here. So in 2019, I introduced the city to my concept of using volumetric monitoring and equating that to the computed annual pollutant removal capabilities of their BMPs. And Joe just showed you the program we use. It's WinSlam. It's what typically is the state of the art used here in Wisconsin. And in that particular program, it gives you your annualized loadings for TSS and total phosphorus or whatever other pollutant you're looking to understand. And so, introducing this concept of saying, okay, well, if we can determine how much volume you capture in your BMP, we can equate it directly to a pounds per cubic foot of pollutant removal. Okay, and certainly that makes a lot of sense, right? So this, so we pitched the idea to the city to actually implement some kind of a pilot program that would monitor their current BMPs and understand just how they're working, because we said, look, it'll tell you how well it's doing now. It'll tell you whether or not it needs maintenance, or if it doesn't need maintenance. It'll tell you how much pollutants you're going to get, how much pollutants are going to be removed by that particular facility. And as we go forward, we can use that data to essentially modify some of the designs that we use for new BMP infrastructures, based upon the idea that, okay, we know under standard engineering practices, we tend to design these systems, that says every drop of water gets into them. And the reality is not every drop of water does get into them, but yet we design them to do that. Okay. And so inherently they're conservatively built, and there's always a little bit more room than what we probably ever expected them to have. And so, the city wanted to know how that affected their performance of their BMPs. And then I'm also working currently with them to develop a strategic plan that will locate new BMPs based upon the data that we pull, understanding how much volume is actually captured in the current BMPs, but then we'll also look at that from a watershed basis and start strategically locating new BMPs that will, whether or not they need more pollutant removal in a specific watershed, or maybe they don't. But the point is that we know the data then, or we have real-time data to help us with that. So that being said, the city, again, they agreed to a pilot program, and just for your information, it was we installed 3 monitors at 3 specific green infrastructure sites. There's a rain, as Joe said, there's a rain gauge installed, and then there's a valve control on one of the BMPs. And I know everybody will ask me, well, how much did it cost? Well, the cost was about $10,000 to do all that. The one thing that's interesting about all this is that all of this, like Joe said, it's tied to the cloud. And so they've built GIS applications where you can bring up the attribute data. You can bring up that asset. It'll tell you all the data. He'll show you some screenshots after we get through this on how we're showing how they're meeting compliance and sort of an ongoing real-time ticker as to, okay, you're at 10% compliance today, and 3 months later you might be at 20 or 30% compliance. And again, all focused to that specific watershed. Okay, and then once I get done with what I'm doing, we can tie it together as a watershed as a whole, which will be an extremely useful tool for them to use. So after we got this thing installed, of course, the city said, well, gee, how are we going to get credit for all this good work you guys are doing and the fact that we're seeing these, remarkable results? Because we are seeing remarkable results. We're actually seeing a higher capture rate than what was originally designed, and we're seeing a much higher efficiency rate than what was originally anticipated. And so, the city's going, well, gee, we want to make sure we get credit for this. So hence we started having a couple of meetings with the state DNR. And we explained to them what we were doing. We showed them how this was going to work. And we made sure that, that they had a true understanding of what we were trying to accomplish. That ultimately turned into a white paper submittal to the DNR, of which they, for lack of a better term, blessed. And they are now in support. And if, Jacob's here to add some additional comments on maybe that support as we get a little further into the presentation or during Q&A. So that we have now, we've been provided with a letter from the DNR that actually documents their support for this system. So we can now, approach other communities and say, this isn't just pie in the sky idea. This is something that really makes sense. So go ahead, flip the screen. So when we talk about the idea of trying to integrate, public and private entities in the city of Cudahy, I'll use this one as an example. This is actually a project that I designed in 2015, and it's a permeable pavement system for a mini storage unit in the city. There's a lot of unique features about this particular design, which I'll talk about in a minute. But what I really want to focus on is why is that this particular site important to the city. And on the graphic, you can see the red splotches and where this site is, and the aerial gives you a sense of how close this is to General Mitchell International Airport, which is the main airport here in the city of Milwaukee. It also is right next to the main outlet called the Edgerton Channel, which basically discharges stormwater from roughly 900 acres of TMDL area into the Kinnickinnick River. So the proximity of the Easy Store, the fact that it's all green infrastructure based, makes this a truly ideal candidate and certainly a strategic location for the city to be considering trying to bring them into the fold as far as a private entity helping them meet compliance needs. So go ahead, Joe, flip it. So Easy Store, just kind of the unique design elements of it. So because of the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District's stormwater runoff rules, this site could only discharge 2.8 CFS after a 100-year storm event. This is about an 8-acre site. It's predominantly, as you can see, mostly impervious. So you can just imagine what kind of a facility you got to design in order to drop that 100-year storm down to 2.8 CFS. I mean, it's like basically a trickle. So in discussing that issue with the owner, the decision was basically made to design the system to basically capture, store, and in this case, infiltrate up to a 100-year storm event. That's not something that's very common when you start talking green infrastructure, but in this case, it was a necessity. Now, original plan for this was to have a pond installed on the far left-hand side of the facility. Well, because they're next to General Mitchell Field, FAA says we're not going to let you put it in there because we got a lot of goose problems around here in Wisconsin, and that's not going to happen. And then when we showed them that if we used green infrastructure, you'd actually get 12 more, 25 more storage units out of it, all of a sudden, obviously, his money button clicked on, and he realized that he could actually get a quicker payback because he wouldn't have used up that area as a pond. He actually is using it for revenue generation. So that's another benefit of this design, is that he actually was, by installing those additional units, he was getting payback. Originally was calculated at 10 to 12 years. He's paid it back and it's less than 5. So, I mean, for his to get that payback on that install is huge. The other thing about this site, because it's designed essentially to carry a 100-year storm, it gives you 100% TSS and TP removal. There's just no way around it. It's going to happen. And it's all going to infiltrate because it's not discharging into any city storm sewer systems. Using these systems eliminated the pond maintenance. And the other thing that he was really trying to get installed was a better user or a better tenant-friendly environment. He has lots of problems with icing issues on his other sites. In this case, using a strip of paved drain in the galleries in between all the buildings eliminated that. We don't have icing problems here anymore, and he certainly doesn't have any water problems. So at the end of the day, the system's really set up to do a lot of really wonderful things. And honestly, because it is so large, there is certainly an opportunity maybe for the city, if they had to consider tying some of their infrastructure into it, simply because knowing how much volume this actually captures, or maybe the excess volume that's there after it captures all this stuff, is even more important. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the benefits associated between the two, but Joe's going to talk a little bit about some of the other nuts and bolts of this and how it works for a couple minutes here, and then I get to talk to you a little bit longer. So, but not much, I promise.
So thanks, Todd. The question is, how does the city, let's say the city, buys in, install these sensors to try to gain the additional efficiency that they can out of their existing BMPs, or install sensors in new BMPs as they continue on their quest toward EPA compliance, or they begin doing community-based P3s with an easy storage. How do they look at a geographically distributed sensor network and incorporate the measured data into their EPA compliance strategy? So I'm going to show how they'll basically how you would interface with data from your sensors, and then I'm going to go through how the data can be used in a compliance strategy. So Seth, I'm going to bounce out of the PowerPoint briefly and bring up a web page. Can everybody see a web page now?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so what you can see now is this is the home page of our online Esri-based dashboard. This is what a customer would see if they purchased and subscribed to purchase sensors and subscribe to the data stream. And what's probably a little bit handier is this map view. And again, this is an Esri-based map. It's live. It's you zoom in and out. These pin drops represent all the devices that we've got deployed throughout the state of Wisconsin. And in the case of one of the sites here that is in Cudahy, click on it and it'll take you to your site. I can close this. You can also turn on different views so you can see what's going on. But essentially, this is one of the green alleys in the city of Cudahy that is unfortunately not showing up in this aerial, but there is a strip of paved drain permeable pavement down the middle of this alley, and it all drains to this low end. That's where the level sensor is installed, and ultimately under drain that is underneath this pavement drains to a catch basin here. This is where the valve is installed, and so that's where we're taking our measurements. The nice thing over here is you kind of get a snapshot of what the current measurement is. You also have an ability to look at a historical set of data, whatever range. I'll just type in the last 3 months, let's say, and you can see in a quick snapshot what the system's been doing over time. And you can also download it, and it becomes really easy at this point. It's in a CSV file. You basically have a date and time stamped measurement with the property that's being measured. And at this point, you can, as the user of that data, you can do whatever you want with it, whatever you need to do with it to incorporate in a report or plotting or what have you. And we have analytical tools that we're going to be adding to this dashboard as time goes on. The other thing I wanted to point out, and I'll get to one of those analytical tools that is not integrated into this yet, but that's really what we're it's really where the value comes into play. One thing I just wanted to point out quickly is, like I mentioned, this is not a permeable pavement only system. These are devices that can be installed in really any infrastructure, and that's part of my job, is making sure that they can get into those hard to reach, hard to view places. Like in this case, in the city of Appleton, Wisconsin, this is an asphalt parking lot. Underneath what you can't see is an 8-foot deep concrete storage tank, a storm trap system. It's got 14 acre feet of volume capacity, and the city built this, and it occupies essentially this entire footprint underneath the surface. And we've got a 10-foot version of that sensor in a manhole here to monitor water levels. So the reason we're doing that for the city is that this system solved their flooding issues for this part of their city, but they have flooding issues elsewhere in the city, and they'd like to address it in the same way. But what they've found is that after they go and look at this tank after a rain event, prior to us having a sensor in there, they were not able to see any water level moving, ups or downs in the water level, and they were wondering, how is this thing working, and how much water is it actually taking? And so again, they can take a look at now. It's been installed since December of last year, and if I just bring up 3 months, you can see, as you get some pretty good rain events, that they know exactly what's going on when it happens, and they can download this information and analyze it as they see fit. So that's kind of a really quick view of how customers can view data that they subscribe to. They've also, anybody can subscribe to any one of these devices to get an understanding of how different types of infrastructure are working. So if you want to understand how a storm trap system is working, you can subscribe to Appleton's data and view that. So the next thing I want to talk about is
Joe, before you move on too far, I mean, we are really coming, we're running out of time quickly. So this is all great information, but we need to move along. Is there a way that we can skip ahead a bit so we can have some time for questions? I apologize.
No, not a problem. I guess this is the last.
And also love to hear from Jacob too, if that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I can. Unfortunately, I wanted to. It's okay. We can. This is our Sunburst technology for visualizing compliance, and essentially, it's a way for a community to very quickly see, have you met, like what Todd was saying, have you met your compliance goal, or do you still have a gap? And depending on what your BMPs are doing, you can see performance that is being documented and measured in the field, live updating a dashboard like this to show, have you met your compliance? If you want to bring in a privately owned BMP into the fold and see what the impact is, you can do that. And you can see that in one case you have gaps, and in another case now you've got credits. By incorporating and working in a public-private partnership with a privately owned BMP that you were accounting for previously in your compliance quest, now once you bring it into the fold with a sensor to document its performance, you could end up with a credit that you could trade with other communities, depending on where you are, up or downstream in a basin. So I'll leave that at there, and I guess we do have a list of benefits that we could go through, Seth, but we probably could talk about the benefits in a Q&A as well. So if you wanted to.
Well, if Jacob's on the line, if he wants to talk, if you guys have any thoughts on that, we'd just love to hear from the state regulator perspective in this whole context. You guys have given a great overview and appreciate that. But
yeah, Jacob,
yes.
If you go ahead, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Seth. And yeah, I'll be brief. I didn't prepare any slides or anything, but just so everyone knows who I am, I'm Jacob Zimmerman. I'm a stormwater engineer with Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I'm the stormwater sector lead for the Milwaukee River TMDL. And I think the key with that most of the municipalities are facing, which they're facing higher pollutant loads due to TMDLs, lack of available land to build new BMPs, maintenance concerns, design considerations here specifically are clay and not very good soils for infiltration, and then the need to treat for dissolved nutrients, which are causing a lot of our water quality impairments, phosphorus and nitrogen. And when P4 initially brought this to us, I was really happy to hear that they were installing a system like this and trying to learn specifically how their BMPs that are already installed are working. Because as Todd mentioned earlier, we do have very conservative design assumptions and standards, for 100-year storms, things like that. And we want to know that these systems will work and provide the treatment removal that we need. But at the same time, there is some information you can't collect pre-designed, so you have to use conservative assumptions. And installing a system like they proposed allows you to really understand what is the infiltrative capacity of these, considered tight clay soils. If it's a lot better than we're assuming, you should be able to get credit for things like that. And unfortunately, no one from Cudahy is here, but I wanted to say I give them a lot of accolades for being the first one to install these and to try to pilot this. And as we think about, the overall MS4 standard and removing pollutants to the maximum extent practicable, you need to start somewhere, and this type of system allows you to, make your reductions within our current tech standards, but then, have the system provide you the feedback to really know what you're getting in terms of water quality benefit. And then that information will help you when you're doing your bigger infrastructure planning and trying to understand how many more BMPs you need and trying to be cost effective and dealing with the other issues of land availability and things like that, and the maintenance piece, which is always the big question mark for municipalities, and finding money and knowing when to do the maintenance. So I'll leave it at that, and I can take any questions during the Q&A as well.
Okay. Dom, we only have literally 2 minutes left. There's some questions that have come in, and I can share those with the speakers to get some questions offline after this. But in the meantime, Dom, did you have any reactions or thoughts that you wanted to share after all that we've heard and comment on that?
Well, clearly this is moving. Due to the efforts here, perhaps even more of these types of applications are happening. So I'm just pleased to see this kind of change. And of course, I have all kinds of applications I'm thinking of right now, as well as scale up. Let's give, third technologies and expediting them. There have been challenges, for new emerging technologies that are there to solve the problem. However, again, coming up against bureaucracy and requirements. In some cases, it takes 7 months, I've heard even 3 years, to get a new technology certified to address a fast growing problem. And I'm hearing that this type of sensor technology could actually provide the data on the technologies that I'll just say, are doing the work of addressing whether it's runoff or local flooding. There's a nice sort of complement, synergy in terms of this kind of technology, and also the next generation of pervious pavement or bioretention or et cetera. So I'll save my thoughts for what we're going to do with the Center of Excellence, and we're going to certainly include all of our friends here, but I'll defer to those questions.
Okay, thanks. Rather than go do the full Q&A again, we're out of time. I wanted to give Sandy and Toni and Joe and Todd just a very quick last minute or last second thoughts that you want to share. And also, I'm not going to volunteer this for you guys, but I will share the questions that we've received. If there's something that you can share with us, I will share that with the participants. So, Sandy, do you want to share some quick thoughts on kind of how we, as we close here?
Sure. I would just say that it's been great participating in this today. I'm excited to learn about the other technologies that are out there that are being tested in Wisconsin. certainly we have the same types of challenges that I think that one of your example projects highlighted in terms of storage. So I'm looking forward to seeing what other innovations are going to be coming down the line, because we are definitely interested in continuing to try innovative and efficient ways to manage stormwater, and to find ways to deliver better environmental outcomes resulting from our projects. So thank you for allowing me to participate today.
Thanks, Sandy. Toni, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so just appreciate being able to be a part of this conversation. And there's probably a Walmart or a Sam's Club in your backyard, so definitely reach out to me. I know Seth has my contact information. I'm happy to discuss any other opportunities that are out there for us.
Excellent. Thank you, Toni. Joe and Todd, any closing remarks?
Yeah, I guess my one closing remark is, we were talking, what I was listening with Dominique was saying regarding, getting these systems installed, and, it's always pulling teeth kind of thing. The one thing that I noticed here in Wisconsin, in that the TMDL regulations that are coming out with the MS4 permits includes a tracking requirement, as well as a requirement for the municipalities to remove green infrastructure, essentially roadblocks in their ordinances. And so I thought that, from that perspective here in this state, that one of the things that we could do, and this is certainly something that other states, communities could consider, is to require in their ordinances some kind of a volumetric monitoring system or something that's installed in every new BMP or any new retrofitted BMP going forward. And it's important from my perspective. I think that from a private development perspective could be extremely valuable, even though they'll say, oh, gee, it's more money. The cost of a sensor in one of their systems is not going to be much more than a few $1,000s. So that's really, that's a pimple on an elephant's butt when it comes to the cost of a development. And
in other words, the marginal cost is low.
Right. But the return is huge, because now all of a sudden it ties it to the community. The community can tie the resulting information that they get. They can certainly share that with the developer. They have a way of essentially enforcing a maintenance agreement, because they can look at that maintenance agreement instead of just a simple prescribed every 2 times a year you go out and do this. They might actually see that BMP doesn't need maintenance for 5 or 10 years. So that cuts down the maintenance cost on the developer. But yet at the same time, the community can watch can understand the efficiency of that BMP, and they could certainly put in safeguards that if it reaches a 50% efficiency level, there's an automatic letter that's dropped into the mail to the developer saying, hey, guess what? Your BMP is in need of maintenance. So things like that, to have it simply as an ordinance element, to demand that it is put into place, drives the public-private partnership even tighter, because you now have that connection, and it's a digital connection, and it's one that benefits both from a monetary perspective as well as a compliance perspective.
Yeah,
so,
if it costs $2,000 to put in a monitor or sensor, and you can generate $10,000 of credit, clearly it's worth it, right?
Right.
I agree.
And there's also that certainly that, with the city of Cudahy, eventually, I'm sure that they will get to the point of looking through pollutant trading. And certainly if you have partners in the private sector that are part of that, they could be part of the rebate system that they could get as part of that, cost for the credits being sold. And certainly the city could, as part of being the partnership program, provide some percentage rebate to that private entity as essentially a reward or an incentive to be part of that group. So with that, thank you. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk about what we're doing here and how we're trying to accomplish this. And it's a, you know, this is something replicatable across the nation. This isn't something just specific to Wisconsin. So
well, Todd, you've given us something.
I do want to make a comment. I do. Sorry, this is. So I do. You know, historically, there's been controversy about trading in credits. I personally have been a part of that concern about potentially trading off a local community's benefit, right, to another community. And this gets into the equity, you know, disparate impacts on poor communities and concerns about not only improving the water quality, but that they don't lose good water quality if there's, you know, a trading program or something comes along where it's traded off. I think what I'm hearing is actually the transparency of this technology allows in a watershed setting to see and to ensure that you're not trading off livability, you know, that in fact you're maintaining or improving where it's not there, but also not losing that investment, right, for those marginalized communities. So I do, you know, for those listening and hearing words like trading, which, you know, from where I come from, those bells and whistles go off, and certainly from the environmental community, as also someone that was very involved in EPA's environmental justice program, I actually am hearing that this could be a benefit in terms of addressing, you know, those types of concerns, you know, particularly in the age of more intense storms and increased, you know, waste management and other impacts to poor communities.
Yep.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is, Todd, I think you've given the Center of Excellence here as we're launching this, moving this forward, is giving us some action items, maybe about ordinances and whatnot too, that we can encourage for MS4. So, Joe, any last closing remark here?
Yeah, I would just like to touch on Todd's comment about replicating, you know, this across the nation. This is not just a Wisconsin thing that we're doing, and it's not just a permeable pavement thing. It's not just a wet pond thing. It's not just an underground storage tank thing. It's really all stormwater infrastructure, really all infrastructure, if you want to broaden the conversation. But it does not just have to be water level measurement. It can be water temperature. It can be sedimentation. It can be really anything. I know that there are different communities have different needs and different infrastructure to address those needs. And there is an ability to get into difficult to reach places with some pretty cool sensors that are out there. And it's a matter of just understanding what you want to get out of it. Is it a matter of getting a higher efficiency? Is it a matter of just simply documenting volume? Whatever that is to make your infrastructure, the dollars that you've spent on the infrastructure go further, it's doable.
Right.
And so I just
you can't manage what you can't measure, right? So
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate everybody's time, all the speakers. Appreciate your time and all the effort that went into preparing this. I appreciate everybody joining us today. You can see our next event is next Wednesday, also focusing on technologies and ponds. And there's information there. If there's any questions, my information is there. Everyone will receive a PDF of these presentations, and we'll also have a recording of this available. So we're a little bit over time, so I'm going to wrap up at this point. But again, I want to thank all the speakers, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. With that, I'm going to wrap things up. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.